Hi, welcome to week one of Leadership in Diverse and Under-Resourced Communities. My name's Andrew Sears, and I want to talk a little bit about my background and why I'm passionate about this course. I've basically been leading in diverse and under-resourced communities for a large portion of my life. I grew up in the hood in Kansas City, lower working class neighborhood. I ended up going to college, and whenever I went to college, people thought I was unusual because I was a white guy who talked like he was black because I grew up in a predominantly African American community, and I didn't realize that was unusual until I went to college. And I've spent the past 22 years in urban ministry. I started ministry in the Black church. Angel Halstead, African American minister, was my first mentor, and also, the gender element of this course is really important. I married. My wife is a strong Christian leader, has a doctorate. And over the years, I've probably directly supervised over 300 people and indirectly over 1,000, and a very diverse group. We ran a national AmeriCorps program where out of over 100 national grantees with AmeriCorps, we had the highest percentage of Black and Latino leaders and the highest percentage of Black and Latino-led sites. And we placed almost 600 interns. And I partnered with and saw into the leadership of hundreds of urban ministries, white-led ministries, Black-led ministries, Latino, Asian, male and female-led ministries. I've read lots of leadership books, and while I found them helpful, I wanted to create a course that builds on the wealth of leadership teaching, but extends it to be more useful to our students who typically either come from or work in diverse or under-resourced communities. So that's why I created this course. I realize, being a white male who comes from a lower income background, that's going to, color my perspective on this. I'm trying to do as much as I can to bring in as many perspectives as possible. So that's the introduction. Now, let me talk with you a little bit about how this course can help you become a balanced leader. So throughout our courses, we use this grid, and this is how we designed our management programs. So the basic idea, this is something called competing values framework. And the idea is there's 4 competing values, and they compete across the diagonal. So you have business skills, and then you have ministry skills, and they're often at tension with each other. And then you have the operations people, they're often at tension with the entrepreneurial people. So to be a little more specific, let me talk about the courses we have. So we have a lot of ministry courses, and you can see that list there. As opposed to those ministry courses, we have a lot of courses on things like fundraising and grant writing. How do you get the money into your ministry? How do you track the money? And then the same thing on operations. So we have, accounting, project management, board governance. And then on the opposite side, we have social entrepreneurship and small business management. And then in the middle, we have introduction and capstone courses that try to integrate. And this course is in the ministry sector, but it's also trying to integrate somewhat between these sectors, because to be a good leader, you need to be balanced across all of those sectors. So let me also frame it in another way. So these 4 quadrants, the top half is what many would call leadership dominant, and the bottom half will be what many call management dominant. And sometimes they'll say the top is transformational leadership skills and the bottom is transactional leadership skills. Now, this course is farther up compared to our cross-cultural management and ministry course. It's going to be more in the leader domain. That one's a little more in the management domain. And often the way this works is personality will determine whether you're in the leadership dominant or management dominant role. And it's kind of like your left and right hand, but good leaders and managers need to strive to be skilled in all 4 quadrants. So, you may say, I'm more of a manager than a leader. Well, you need this course because you need to be balanced. You need to, not just manage people, you also have to be able to inspire people. So let me talk about the course outcomes and how, what really we want you to be able to do after you finish this course. So first part of the course, what we really want you to do is this is kind of a pause in your life and having you reflect on your leadership journey. Even if you say you're not a leader, just think of, anything throughout your life, reflect on your journey. And we're going to go through a traditional Christian leadership theory. And then the second part, we're going to use that so you can create a philosophy of ministry and leadership, integrating your personal experience with key concepts of the course. Then the third thing you're going to do is construct a leadership toolkit for new supervisors in an organization by applying leadership theories into your context. Fourth, you're going to develop a plan for expanding your own cross-cultural leadership ability. Fifth, you're going to use systems thinking to create a plan that includes the personal, physical, cultural, and organizational aspect of your own leadership development. And the last thing you're going to do is to create a plan for an organization to increase the representation of women and people of color in leadership. So we're very practical here. We want to give you, these are the projects that you're going to be doing. This is basically the summary of the 6 major projects that you'll do in this course. So the 8 weeks that we're going to cover, we're going to start off with the journey of a leader. Week 2, you're going to do a leadership timeline and go through something called the reflective evaluation pattern. Then we're going to talk about leadership maturing processes. So Clinton's book, The Making of a Leader, these first 3 and 4 weeks that's where we're going to focus especially. And we're going to talk about servant leadership and developing a philosophy of ministry. In week 5, you're going to go through and discuss the differences between transformational and transactional leadership and full range leadership. And then in week 6 we're going to make a pivot, and you're going to be leading in under-resourced and diverse environments. We're going to be giving you tools to translate a lot of those things. And then week 7, we're going to talk about the challenges to having more diverse organizational leadership. And then 8 is going to be focused on leading organizational change across race, class, and gender. So one other thing I want to cover is just recognizing the limits of online learning and leadership. Whenever I do a course like this, I'm very cautious because online courses are really good at doing head learning. You can do some heart learning, but it's a lot more difficult to do heart learning. And if what we do is we get you a lot of head learning about, leadership and cross-cultural ministry, and you haven't, had the experience or the maturity, honestly, then you can do a lot of damage with that. So we want to give you guides. So, on the heart learning, largely what we're doing is we're giving you maps to say, here's how you can do the heart learning, but it's going to be hard for us to do that heart learning in 8 weeks. And ultimately around justice, how you get the heart learning is you go through experiencing and healing long-term suffering. As someone experiencing oppression is one way you can learn heart learning for justice. Deep cross-cultural friendships and relationships, and long-term experience as a cultural minority, where you might be living in a community where you're not in the dominant group in that community, even if you come from a dominant culture in larger society, or going to another country, or attending a church where you're in the minority. So all those things will bring heart level learning, but we can't really teach you all that in 8 weeks, right? And then hands learning is, it's the doing. So that would be experience in leading diverse and under-resourced organizations. So, if you've tried to lead in that context, then you're going to learn a lot of things. And also just getting, it's like learning a new language. So, you'd have to go immerse yourself to learn that language, and you get cross-cultural fluency from long-term experience in cross-cultural settings. So in this next slide, I want to talk about the educational philosophy of the design of this course. So you start the course where you have content, and we try to often reinforce content retention by having both reading and videos. And studies have shown that if you both read something and you watch it, you're going to retain it better, even if one is a preference to you over the other. So often we'll have both of those. And then the first goal, so this is something called Bloom's taxonomy, is we want you to be able to remember what you learned. Then sometimes you can remember it. You could quote something back, but you may not understand it. So the way the course is going to be organized is we're going to have assessments and assignments to just try to get you to focus on understanding the ideas. You can imagine this, you're actually building levels in your learning. So we're going to have live meetings, we're going to have forums, and then you're going to be doing summary assignments of the leadership experience and the third book that you're going to pick. And these might seem fairly basic, and sometimes you'll go through these and you'll say, this seems very similar to the major assignment this week. The idea is the first time we want you to kind of give a summary, to reflect on it, and then we want you to go much more in depth. So, we're basically saying, do you understand the concepts in the first level? Then we're going to have different projects in the course. So in week 2 of Making of a Leader, you're going to do a leadership timeline. So that's going to be a project you're going to go through. So you're applying what you learned in the Making of the Leader. And then later, we're going to have you can do some analysis and evaluate. And some of the projects we'll have you do analysis, and then later, we'll have you do the other part. But week 5, you're going to be doing a leadership toolkit for new supervisors. Essentially, what we're trying to have you do, you're going to go through a textbook called The Leadership Experience, and we want you to say, what are the best theories that fit our context? That's evaluate. And then create, or sometimes this is called synthesis. So on Making of a Leader, you're going to go through and you're going to develop your own leadership philosophy. And then in week 7 and 8, you're going to create your personal diverse leadership growth plan and organizational diversity growth plan. So that's the organization of the course. Now, this is all what's called the cognitive domain. This is your head. And there's another domain that's important that we look at in the course, and this is what's called the affective or the heart domain. And for Christians, we're familiar with this idea. The best way is to look at how I'm describing these stages on the left. So someone could attend church, so they're at the first level. They're willing to show up, right? So we get students that attend class. And then responding would be actively learn about Jesus in their own time. They're very, interested in the church. They're, that would be someone who actually, is working hard on their homework, right? So, on concept. On the valuing, on the heart level, so this would be someone who actually makes a decision to follow Jesus on the heart level, right? So in this course, though, what that's going to be, that would be making a decision to improve your leadership style. Even in writing this course, I was convicted that I needed to improve some aspects of my leadership style. So I decided to, there's some concrete actions I'm going to take out of this. So we want you to have that happen for you also. And then organization. So, for people who are following Jesus, this is, what you're doing is you're learning and you're realizing, oh, this aspect of my life actually doesn't fit with how I should be following Jesus. A lot of people, they started, they've made a decision to follow Jesus while they're doing drugs or in a, having an affair or something like that. And then they slowly, get, in Christian terms, they call it sanctified. So you're slowly being sanctified. And the idea is you want to be characterized. So characterize Jesus in your life. So ultimately our goal for you in this course is that you would change aspects of how you lead, and you'd characterize effective leadership. So in this course, there's 3 books that we're going to go through, and we're blending some different perspectives, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. So there's a book called The Making of a Leader. This is probably the most used book on leadership in Christian colleges, and it's by Dr. Robert Clinton. And then The Leadership Experience, which this is probably the most popular book in the schools overall about leadership. And then the third, this is bringing in Christian perspective. This is bringing in academic theory perspective. But these are both what I describe as majority culture perspectives. We want to bring in some outside perspectives, but our student body is so diverse that we said it's going to be better if you pick a book. So we actually have a book list of 10 or 15 books that you could pick from, because we, have, I've read through 50 or 100 books in this space. So, and I can identify, here's the ones that I think might be the best, right? So, but some of you may know others, but what you have to do whenever you pick a book, you have to pick a book that you didn't read. So that's going to be one of your assignments in the course. So what we're really trying to do in the course is we're trying to give you different lenses. By the end, you may feel like, oh my goodness, I've learned so many different theories, I'm just overwhelmed, right? And, the idea is any lens you use, it's kind of like when the Bible says, now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know even as I am known. Any theory you learn is going to be limited. It's going to be like you're wearing some sunglasses. Now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to teach you different shades of sunglasses. They're all going to have implicit weaknesses in them, but they're all helpful. So that's what we're trying to do in this course. So the first part is going to be traditional Christian perspectives on leadership. That's the making of a leader. The second part is going to be academic theories on leadership, the leadership experience. And the third part is going to be leadership perspectives across race, class, and gender. And that's where we're going to have you select a book, and we're going to provide a lot of supplemental material because it's the best way to provide that. So hopefully, and the goal at the end you would integrate all of these perspectives and develop your own, kind of theory. Now, another analogy we might use in addition to the sunglasses is I love this story of the old engineer and the hammer. The story is there's this giant engine in a factory that failed, and the factory owners had spoken to many experts, but none of them could solve the problem. So they brought in an old man who had been fixing engines for many years, and he looked at this engine, and after a minute or two, he pulled a hammer out of his tool bag and gently tapped on the engine, and immediately the engine started working again. So a week later, the owners of the business received an invoice from the old man for $1,000, and they said, they wrote to the old man and they said, send an itemized bill, because they're like, why was it $1,000 just for you to hit this thing? And they said, the man wrote on the bill, he said, use of hammer, $1, knowing where to tap, $999. So ultimately, that's what we're trying to do with you in this course. Is we're going to try to provide you with as many tools as possible, and experience is going to help teach you where to tap. But if you have a good tool set, you'll know, you'll at least know that there are these tools that you can use. So hopefully that's helpful as an analogy. The next thing I want to talk about is teaching on leadership across race, class, and gender. So this is a grid, and the top part of the grid is different racial groups in the United States. And I put down here, if you're in another country, you could just imagine whatever your primary ethnic groups are in your country, and you could replace those. So you might have other different groups, and then you have male and you have female within each of those groups. And, each person should fall within one square of this, right, of where you currently are. And the challenge on books on leadership is most books and material on leadership come from the perspective of white, male, middle class, or upper class perspective. So now that doesn't mean that the principles they're teaching don't apply in other places, but it means that it is one lens. So we want to have more lenses in this course. There's, in a lot of secular institutions, they'll have teaching on leadership, and I would argue that whenever they teach on leadership in diverse communities, they're largely trying to do this. They're saying, we're going to cover the different racial groups, we're going to cover different genders, but for the most part, a lot of schools, especially on leadership and diversity, they're really focusing on the middle and upper class, and that's why in this course this course has the title Leadership in Diverse and Under-Resourced Communities, right? So we want, many of you are leading in under-resourced communities. That could be a nonprofit organization that serves in an under-resourced community. It could be that the nonprofit is under-resourced itself. You could be in a developing country that's under-resourced. And there's different principles that are going to apply in different lenses that you can apply. So that's part of the purpose of this. Now, comparing City Vision's courses that are focused on this topic. So this topic is a leadership course. So we're going to talk about, these are different theories that are out there in different lenses. So the lenses that you're going to be trying on in this course are the lens called Christian Leadership Emergence. That's Clinton's book on leadership, the making of a leader. Academic leadership theories, that's going to be the other book. And then we're going to go through the gender lens, the race lens, and then a lens that people call the race, class, and gender lens. And then we're going to be applying this to organizational strategy. We're also going to provide systems thinking in this course. Cross-cultural management covers some of the same lenses. It covers race. It does a little bit more on ethnicity. It covers race, class, and gender. Organizational strategy, but then it does a deeper dive on class. It does a deeper dive on ethnic identity development. And it does a deeper dive. It covers global cultural dimensions. And then we have another course called Christian Community Development. And that takes a racial lens again, but it goes through and provides a lens called Christian Community Development. We also are going to cover other Christian social justice traditions like rescue missions and Salvation Army, and go doing a deeper dive on the biblical basis for justice. Now, all of our courses are built around a biblical basis of justice, but we're not going to provide 400 Bible verses in this course, because what we're really trying to do in this course is we're trying to help you to get stuff done in your organization based around a Christian worldview. So let me also talk about another thing. So sometimes the terms diversity and inclusion can be difficult for some evangelical Christians. Now, let me talk about the reason why. So the term inclusion has often been used by the far left to promote what I would call a relativistic, everything's allowed approach to morality, which essentially runs counter to biblical teaching. So the Bible actually does say some things are wrong, and that you shouldn't do that. And we don't, use the term inclusion to say, everything's relativistic and everything's allowed, right? So recognizing also that the term diversity in some circles has become a loaded term with strong political connotations. Also, in elite secular academic circles, diversity has effectively excluded social class. As I mentioned before, most universities, for them, diversity is a limited subset. It means upper middle class usually, and inclusion typically excludes evangelicals. So I have to use these terms because there aren't better terms, but it's important to recognize that just because someone has misused these terms, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't use them. So the other reason is there's been a battle for worldview between elite secular academies and the Christian worldview. And much of the secular teaching on diversity incorporates assumptions of a secular worldview, such as materialism. And I'll talk a lot more about that later. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is limitations on language in the doctrine of sin. So my theological perspective is that all knowledge, language, theories, models, systems, even words are limited, and they have sin inherently built into them. So as Tim Keller says, if sin were blue, I would not have a blue dot on me. I would have blue throughout me. And I think that's not just true of ourselves individually. I think that's true in the world. So what a lot of people do, especially in secular circles, they try to create this, worldview around, certain identities, and it's a perfect worldview. And I just don't think that that's true. So our goal should be to minimize the limitations of the language, minimize offense as much as possible, while also being gracious, recognizing the fallen nature of language. Our student body is diverse enough that if I use certain terms, it's going to offend other students. And if I, no matter what terms I use, in some cases, it's going to offend some people, and it's just difficult. So I'm asking you to be gracious with me in this. The government requires that we report on Hispanic students. For some, some students refer to be called Latino, Latina, or Latinx. But we have to, categorize people as Hispanic because that's the law. So anyway, the general rule is to call people what they prefer to be called, recognizing that age, social class, and country may influence preference. So, younger, more educated people might prefer to be called Latinx, while older, less educated people might still prefer, Hispanic. So, recognize that it is important to move culture from oppressive language. So I'm not just saying that, okay, all those people who are concerned about language are just being difficult. No, language is, how we use language is important, right? So let me just talk about some examples so you know what I'm talking about. And I don't want us to be, caught up in, everyone being afraid to use, whatever words. But, do we call, communities poor, at risk, vulnerable, under-resourced, or lower working class? Each of those have pros and cons to it. One of my pet peeves is a lot of people don't like to use the word poor. I mean, I grew up poor. To me, saying you can't use the word poor is kind of like whenever people say I'm colorblind, I don't see color. Some people don't want to see class. So, but even the word poor has negative connotations with it. All of those have negative connotations with them in one capacity or another, right? So, I already mentioned Hispanic, Latino, Latina versus Latinx, Black versus African American. People should just recognize that Black is a Pan-African term. So whenever we are in Boston, the largest, Black group, Black church group was called the Black Ministerial Alliance. It wasn't called the African American Ministerial Alliance because it consisted of, Caribbean Americans, Africans, all sorts of people of African origin. So, across gender, he, she, whenever you're writing, are you going to put he or she? Or I actually prefer to use they. And some of the style guides now, I think APA actually now allows for the use of they for singular. Thank Jesus that they are allowing that, because it's so difficult. Or, I've seen a lot of authors alternate he and she. And it's worth stating that as time goes on, there's certain ways we use words that just generally are no longer considered acceptable. So if you read The Making of a Leader by Robert Clinton, that was written, I don't know, a couple decades ago, especially the first version of it was, he always uses he in referring to leaders. I get that that's offensive and we should try not to use that. But 20 years ago, that was more common, right? I like to use they whenever I have to use a singular. And then, there's other, issues between people of color versus minorities versus Black and brown. So the point is, let's do the best we can, and just let's try to be gracious. So hopefully all this has been helpful. I'm excited to have you in the course. I think we're going to have a really good teaching team for this course. If you have any questions, just ask your instructor. Thanks a lot.